These images are absolutely insane. The portraits look straight out of a fashion magazine. I guess it's obvious in hindsight that the leading video model trained on 14 billion parameters would be able to crank out high quality images as well. These were all done using Wan 2.1, and I'll show you how to set it up and optimize it for the best images possible. I'll also compare it to Flux to see which one is better. Let's get into it. Okay, first thing is getting all the models that you'll need. The very first one is obviously Wan 2.1. So you want to go to the site linked in the description below. And the one that you're looking for will be the one that fits within your VRAM. So this is specific for the GGUF models. I have 8 gigs of VRAM. So I've been using either the Q5 or the Q4. The Q5 works, but if you're trying to do higher resolution images, like 1920 by 1080, I usually go down to the Q4 just to give it a bit more headroom on the VRAM so I don't run out of memory, or if it doesn't swap and make it slow. So grab either the Q4 or the Q5 and make sure you're getting the text to video model. The next set of files you need is the text encoder and the VAE. You can grab them from the Comfyui site. Just download these two and put them in the right directories. And now we move on to the LoRa's. So there's a couple of LoRa's that are necessary for the workflow to make the images better and also the speed better. One of them that's a must-have is the Light X2V. This one is this file right here. Make sure you get this one, the text to video 14B Light X2V distilled LoRa. This will help speed it up so that you can make generations in 8 steps or less. And then finally, the Realism Boost LoRa. So this one you can grab from Civet AI. The file here, you can just grab the download from here. And this one will enhance the details of the image, which I'll show you examples of before and after. This is optional, but I think it's good to have and you can turn on or off afterwards. Okay, now that we have all the files, we can go and look at the workflow. Again, the workflow will be linked in the description down below. So for this one, as with all the other workflows that I've posted, I try to keep all the custom nodes to a minimum and just use the core ones if I can. This one only comes with 2 extra custom nodes that you'll need. One is the GGUF, and then the other is the Comfy KJ nodes, which this part is optional, but you'll need it for the Wan video nag. But in general, it's a pretty simple workflow. Follows a lot of the different Wan video generation workflows or the image generation workflows that you're probably used to. So we'll start with the models first. Pretty easy. The GGUF loader. You'll put the GGUF that you've downloaded. So I put the Q4 in here. And then the text encoders. So put the UMT5 one. And then the VAE, the Wan 2.1 VAE. Load these in. Again, with the text encoder, if you can, offload it to CPU. If you can, it'll just save some VRAM. Next, these two sets are for the speedups. You can bypass these if you don't have it, or if you don't have stage attention or the torch compile set up. You can always just do a bypass or delete them if you don't need them. And then the next two are the LoRa's. So I have 2 LoRa loader model only nodes up here. One of them is always on. So the Light X2V should always be on. It should always be at strength 1. Then the second one is the Realism Boost. This one you can either turn on or off depending on what look you're looking for in the image. But usually with most of the images that you've seen, I have it turned on. It just adds a lot more detail, and you'll see that in the comparison. But that's it for the LoRa's, and all of these feed into the Wan video nag. Then you have your prompts, the negative prompt, and then the positive one, which is where you put the image generation prompt. So the positive prompt will feed into the K sampler, and then the negative prompt will feed into the Wan video nag, which will enable negative prompts for it, whereas usual it doesn't. Next is the Wan video nag. So you have the model, then the negative prompt conditioning gets plugged into here. Just leave the defaults values here. You don't have to touch them. Then the model output gets loaded into the shift. You can leave that at 1, and then that goes into the K sampler. You also have the negative prompt going into the negative K sampler, positive going to the positive, and then down here you set the latent size using this node, and that gets fed into the latent image. So for sizing, I try to generate at 1920 by 1080 or close to 1080. For vertical, obviously you can do 1080 by 1920 instead. Sometimes on vertical portraits, I like to make it a little bit wider, so a 3:2 aspect instead of the 16:9. So you can do 1088 by 1632, and that gives you a little bit of a wider portrait. But otherwise, you set your resolutions in here, and that gets fed into the K sampler as well. Now onto the K sampler, the seed, obviously I put it on randomize. Steps, because you have the Light X2V, you can run these in less than 8 steps. So I found that in my testing, minimum should be around 6. Anything less than 6, the image doesn't look as nice. But between 6 to 8, there's not too big of a difference. So 6 is a little bit quicker. I try 6. If I see some details missing or some artifacting, I'll move it to 8. But I generally start at 6. CFG, you leave at 1. The sampler and the scheduler make a pretty big difference. So for most of my generations, after doing some testing, I've stuck with Euler as the sampler and Simple as the scheduler. This gives you a good image quality without it being overcooked like Euler Beta. There's a few other schedules that work. One of them will change it quite drastically, but it's pretty good if you're looking for a specific style. And I'll show you that in a second. And then denoise you just leave at 1. All of this gets fed into the VAE decode. The VAE gets plugged into here, and then that goes and generates the image onto a save image. So pretty standard stuff. Now let's take a look at the sampler and scheduler differences. Okay, here's 3 shots, same prompt, same seed, same number of steps, except for the sampler and the scheduler. So the first one's using Euler with DDIM uniform. Second one is Euler beta. And then the last one's using Euler simple. DDIM uniform looks completely different. This one, from all the testing I've done, it lowers the saturation a lot. It makes it look more realistic or normal, kind of like an analog photo or a vintage feel. But it doesn't work all the time for all images. The second one is Euler beta. This one is very glossy, a little bit AI look, a little bit overcooked in my opinion. And then Euler simple is very similar to Euler beta, but just less saturation. And it's just less strong. So her face is less shiny, clothes is less colored. So I prefer to leave it on that one. The next comparison is between using the realism boost LoRa and not using it. So here you can see on this picture, the original one is almost CGI. Her face is very smooth. It doesn't really look like a real one, probably because the prompt is including a dragon, so it doesn't really know how to draw that realistically. But the other details are already really good, like the dragon scales, all the details, their eyes, fur, and her armor are all quite detailed. But once you turn on the realism boost, obviously it makes it much, much better. Like the dragon looks a lot better, the horns, and then her face obviously looks more realistic now. The second example is this starts off with a more realistic portrait. So this one is the woman at the ramen stall. The original one is not bad, but it's lacking some detail in her face. But the good thing with Wan actually is that the faces are all quite random, so they're not the same kind of look that you would get with Flux, which is a good or bad thing. So you can get more realistic a variety of people, but they're not always like super aesthetic like Flux would be. But here, same seed again, with and without the LoRa. The first one's okay, but then so with the realism boost on, obviously it's a lot more aesthetic. The face is more aesthetic, and then everything just looks a bit more polished. So with this, you can either keep the LoRa's on or off. If you don't want it to be too polished, you can lower the strength a bit. But generally, I would keep it on. So now on to some of the more fun parts. I've also compared it with Flux. Same prompts and same resolution. And then we'll get to see the difference between the two models. Flux does have a little bit of a disadvantage because it's just the base one. I didn't use any LoRa's. Obviously, you can change Flux's look quite a bit with the different LoRa's, but right now I'm just testing kind of what base Flux would be, and then what Wan would generate. Sometimes I have the realism boost on, sometimes it's off, but a majority of these are with realism boost on. So a lot of these were just prompts generated from ChatGPT, generally of fashion photography, street photography, that kind of stuff, to test out the portrait capabilities of Wan. This one is a Korean woman in tech wear in front of the Korean palace. So here we see Flux's output. It's okay, but compared to the Wan one, the Wan is just much better. The background is just much better compared to Flux. It's put the palace behind instead of kind of way far off in the distance. The way that the pose is, the clothing, kind of just the whole package on how it's put together is just much better on Wan, I think. And the coloring is just brighter. That's one thing I noticed with Flux as well. In a head-to-head comparison, the background is very plain, and it's almost like there's not as much detail on Flux generations. So for this one, I think Wan is much better looking. On this one, Flux didn't do too badly. Elf Archer in the forest, drawing her bow, and it's supposed to be a close-up. This one's pretty good. I think her face is okay, and you get the elf ears, kind of all that detail. The bow is blurred out. The background, again, you don't see many trees. It's just kind of a smear of green. It also has difficulty with the hands. The hands are a little bit messed up here. But otherwise, this in general would be okay until you compare it to the Wan output, which is like really good and a lot more cinematic. The trees are much nicer on the background. The forest just looks nicer. There's moss. There's moss on her armor. Her armor is more detailed. Everything about this is just a lot better. It did have a little bit of a mess up on the arrow and her finger, but her hands generally look normal. But I think if you just generate another version, you'd probably get one with a better arrow and hand. And then the last one with the ramen stall. This one, Flux, it's okay. It's not a bad image. The hand is really messed up, and she's not really pouring the soup in, which was part of the prompt. But everything else is okay. The background actually on this one doesn't look that bad, but it is a little bit dull. And all the Flux generations have seemed quite dull, especially when you put it next to Wan. When you look at them individually, I think it's okay. But then when you compare it, it's just a huge difference. This one, the lighting is just much better, pose and everything. The composition is just a lot nicer on the Wan images. So hopefully this gave you a feel of what Wan can do. It's pretty amazing at generating portrait shots. I think if you're trying to make any photorealistic style, Wan is definitely way better, and you should use that instead of Flux. Especially with the realism boost, Laura, everything looks really nice. So give it a like if it helped you guys out. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll catch you in the next one.